Are you looking at moving to the Coeur Idaho area and purchasing a home on Acreage? Well, there are some things that you should know before you decide to do that. In this video, I will go over the pros and cons of purchasing a home in Acreage around the Coeur Idaho area. One of the pros can be privacy. You get to have space between you and your neighbor's home, and it depends on how many acres you're looking for. We have anywhere from 1 acre up to 30 plus. So privacy can be a big thing. Not all acreage in this area, however, is going to have trees, so keep that in mind when you're looking, especially the homes on the prairie area. You may have acreage and you may still not have trees for as much privacy, but you'll still have the space. Room to grow. That's a big one of why people want to purchase acreage, is being able to have shops and animals and garden space and just being able to expand on their property. One thing to keep in mind though, just because a home has acreage does not mean that it doesn't have CC&Rs and HOAs. We do have a fair amount of subdivisions in this area that are larger subdivisions that have acreage, but they still have CC&Rs and HOAs that you have to abide to. So make sure that you check those out. Beautiful scenery. Being able to have your own acreage and having space. There's acreage that has trees, there's some that have views, so just keep a lookout for what you want in your acreage. Keep in mind, we do have some acre parcels in town. Those ones tend to be more expensive because they are closer to town and the amenities. A pro can be is being able to have a rental income, such as a apartment above a shop or anything along the lines of that. However, you are going to have to check with the county stipulations on where a property is located to see what those potential rules could be, because there are limitations on a second home and things like that. One of the cons is they typically tend to be higher. Homes on acreage do go for a demand, and the closer they are into town, the more expensive they can be. Same as if they have anything such as a view or lakefront. Those tend to get a lot more expensive than homes with acreage that are much further out. A con can be is it tends to have more maintenance, and maybe not something that people realize when they want to move up here. Typically, they're going to be on rural roads, and so there's going to be a road maintenance as to who shovels the road. Typically, driveways are longer, so again, who plows the road for that? And you're going to have more lawn to take care of, more trees to maintain, so they are a fair amount more work than just a subdivision home or a home that's not on acreage. A longer commute. One of the things is that a lot of our acreage, and as things are going, where you're going to find the acreage that's least expensive, those tend to be much further out. And you could have a commute that's 30 to 40 minutes coming in. And those commute times can change depending on the weather and how much snow we get. So keep that in mind when you're looking where it is into relation to schools, jobs, and anything along the lines of that. Limited opportunities for development. Now, I see people wanting to come up here, buy 20 acres, subdivide it, and each family member gets a portion of that. Yes, that's a great idea, but doesn't necessarily mean that you will be able to do that. There's a lot of factors that go into doing something like that. It depends on what road it's off of, whether the highway districts are going to let you put in 4 driveways off of a road. There's just a lot of factors, so do your due diligence before going in thinking that you're going to be able to subdivide, because there are limits on where a property is located and how small you can subdivide it down. One of the pros is the peace and quiet. Typically, you're on your own land. There is space between you and other people. You're in an area where there's other homes with acreage, and so the noise. There can be less noise, and it can be very peaceful. One of the pros can be outdoor recreational opportunities, being able to snowshoe in the winter on your own property, maybe be able to ride ATVs or motorbikes on your own property. That's something that a lot of people like to do. Also, we do see that some people want to hunt on their own property. The only thing is depending on the size, depending on where neighbors are located, also again, depending if it's in one of those subdivision areas, you might not be able to. So make sure that you look at and do all your due diligence that you can do everything you want to on your property. You're going to have more opportunities to see different wildlife, and that can be great, and it can also be a disadvantage. We do have coyotes, we do have wolves, cougars, bobcats. There are predators and predators to animals. Obviously deer, elk, moose, some of those you can even see in town, but just be aware that with your animals, other domestic animals you have, that there might be some bigger animals that try to come in. The costs aren't cheap. Typically when we get into acreage, the price starts to jump up depending on the home. I just pulled up in Kootenai County, and for 5 acres, now these properties are a drive. There's manufactured homes, but they're still around $500,000. We may see those adjust as we get more into summer, but there's not a lot of them that are super inexpensive because it's such a desire for people wanting to not be close to other people and have their own space. Potentials for environmental hazards. That can be very typical on properties with acreage. For the most part, you'll see that they're treed, so wildfires can come through and that wreaks havoc on people's properties with acreage. Also, wildlife will run around and can cause some issues with that too. Obviously you're on acreage, so it tends to be less crowded, which that is a plus and a big draw why people look for acreage. But again, we do have acreages and parcels that don't have trees around them. So if that's something that you're looking for, just make sure that you're looking in the areas with the acreage that does have that. Because you tend to get in rural areas, you can be limited on the services you have, such as internet or cell phone, TV, phones. So there are, I know in the outskirts areas, when we get into the rural areas, you have to have satellite internet, which cannot be sometimes the greatest for people that work from home that need high speed. So definitely take that into consideration when you're looking, especially if you have to work from home, as to what amenities that are able to be at that property. Obviously you're buying acreage, so you're going to typically have more space to be able to do your hobbies, have farm animals, gardening, things like that. Again, my only thing is make sure that you know what is going on with the property, again, such as CC&Rs or HOAs, or if there are limitations on what you can do. Don't just assume because you're buying acreage that you can do whatever you want. Longer emergency responses. Again, you're going to be further away from town, you're going to be further away from the hospital, so if anything does happen, it is going to take emergency personnel longer to get to you than it does if you're living right in town. As you get further out, which is where majority of these homes are going to be, you're going to be limited on the access to the public transportation that we do have in this area. You have the opportunity to be self-sufficient on your property, such as having gardens, having cows, having animals, and just being able to do a lot more with the land because you have more land. You're going to be limited on services that are available because typically a lot of the acreage properties are going to be rural, so you might not be able to get food delivered. Also, proximity to restaurants or DoorDash, something like that, those are going to be limited depending on your location. One thing people don't realize is typically your insurance costs on acreage is going to be higher. and it's for the fact that you're typically further away from fire stations, or also the fire station rating, which some of the fire stations, when you start to get in those rural areas, are actually volunteer. So make sure you look at what your homeowner's insurance is going to be so that you know what those costs are and aren't blindsided at how high they can be. There could be a limited social connection with people because you are in your own space and spread out. I remember growing up, we had kids that lived out in the Coeur Gulch area, and it was a drive out there. And so anytime their parents were in town, that's the only time that they could do anything. Versus if you're in a subdivision, being able to, especially as a kid, go play with friends, it's just limited on your access and availability because of the distance you have to travel. The closer you get into town, the more expensive that the acreage is going to be. And that's just because you're going to be closer to those amenities and closer in for commute. So yes, purchasing a home on acreage in the Coeur d'Alene, Idaho area seems like a great option and may be a perfect fit for you. Just make sure you look into all the details when doing so. And as always, if you have any questions about real estate and don't already have a real estate agent, feel free to reach out anytime.